for the dime. Launches. Oh, yeah! Jalen Brunson buries it. Knicks lead by 3. The Brunson burner ignited.
Iron Eagles so good. NBA's got some really good play-by-play guys this time of year that you're kind of exposed to for the first time. And you realize, oh, he does basketball too. That was the NBA's clutch player of the year, Jalen Brunson, hitting the biggest shot of the game last night, the biggest shot of the series. The Knicks move on. The Pistons go home. But Wizards fans, remember this about the Detroit Pistons. Before this year, they won 17 games in the 22-23 season. They won 14 games in the 23-24 season. 14. Wizards actually won 4 more games this year than the Pistons won last year. It takes time, but the Pistons are an example, as are, to a certain degree, the Houston Rockets and the Oklahoma City Thunder, about what the Wizards could be in store for in a year or two. All of them went through some variation of what Washington is attempting to do right now, which is strip it down and try to build it up. We'll see. Good morning, everybody. The NBA playoffs right now, just 1 Game 7 out of the 8 first-round series, although there is a Game 6 tonight in San Francisco where Golden State will try to put Houston's hopes to bed. That will be a tough game. Steph Curry's got an injured thumb heading into that game. The NHL playoffs, the same thing. Out of the 8 first-round series, you've got 1 Game 7, but you do have a Game 6 tonight. The Game 7 that you have scheduled will be in Dallas on Saturday night, tomorrow night. That series got evened up last night by Colorado. And the overall best team in hockey, the President's Trophy winning Winnipeg Jets, have a 3-2 series lead. They are in St. Louis tonight. The Blues will be trying to force a Game 7 in that series. Look, the sports in the 2 leagues, the NHL and the NBA, they would love it if they had nothing but Game 6s and Game 7s all weekend long into Monday night. That would be phenomenal for them because there really is nothing that matches a Game 7 in the NBA playoffs or in the NHL playoffs in those respective sports. When you are in best of 7, best of 5 kind of sports, early portions of those series are not as dramatic. They just aren't. You know, if you can enjoy the games and enjoy the intensity, which I do, they're great, but they don't have that do or die aspect that a one-and-done postseason has, the NFL, as an example. But the playoffs have been good in both sports so far. They are in full swing. When you look at it, you know, they start here towards the end of April, and they don't end until early to mid-June. It is long and drawn out, but every night brings something interesting. And last night, Jalen Brunson with a dagger 3 in a game in which they blew a 10-point lead, and then Detroit blew a 7-point lead. But Brunson got it done. He had 40 last night in the Knicks win. The late night game, the Clippers forced the Game 7 in what has really been the best series in the first round in the NBA playoffs. James Harden had himself a game last night. He came out ready. You know, James Harden has not been a very good playoff performer, especially in the latter stages of a series during his career. But last night he came out ready. He went for 28. Kawhi Leonard went for 27 and 10 rebounds. And the Clippers beat the Nuggets 111-105. That should be one hell of a Game 7 tomorrow night. Like in Game 5, and I'm actually surprised at this. I don't really understand it. Game 5, the Clippers were favored on the road against the Nuggets, and they lost big. They are right now a pick'em tomorrow night in Game 7 in Denver. I think Denver should be the favored team at home. I actually think in the 6 games, the Nuggets have been more of a team and more of a difficult sort of team to beat in terms of the way they play. The Clippers are a little bit easy to guard at times. It's a lot of iso ball like the Lakers run. I would favor the Nuggets tomorrow night if I were an odds maker. Of course, they can gauge where the action is and try to even up both sides, but I would think that the evening up of both sides would be Denver at least as a 2.5 point favorite. The game is a pick 'em right now, but that should be a great basketball game tomorrow night and a fun one to watch if you like game sevens. All right. I've got a couple of things to get to. Let me just mention, we have two guests on the show today. Ben Standing will join us a little bit earlier than usual at 11 a.m. because Phil Mendelson, the city council chairman, will be our guest at 12 noon. So we'll talk some stadium with Phil Mendelson and find out where the city council is right now. But this from Devin to open up the show. Devin writes, Kevin, you've got to be kidding me that you don't think the NFL blackballed Shadur Sanders. Second-round talent at worst. So, Devin, I agree with one thing you wrote, and I totally disagree with the other. I agree that he was a second-round talent at worst. I completely disagree with you that the NFL colluded or blackballed Shadur Sanders. This is so simple, guys. It's not hard. We've talked about the examples over the years. All right. If you are, a questionable sort of interview, if there are some red flags around your, draft overall profile, if you are talented, you're going to get picked. They're not passing over on Cam Newton or Caleb Williams. Hell, Johnny Manziel slipped, but he only slipped to 20 in the first round. I mean, it was a major fall considering where he had been projected, but he fell to 20 because they viewed him as a talent, or many teams did. This isn't hard with Shadur Sanders. Two things happened to Shadur Sanders. Number one, the league didn't view him as a first-round talent. Devin, they just didn't. All right. And even you said he was a second-round talent at worst. And that's where part two comes in. As a second-round talent, or worse than second round, but let's just say second round, they viewed him as, at best, a low-end starter, more likely a guy who would be a backup quarterback in the NFL. Throw all the numbers and all the stats and all the hype and all the discussion from mock drafters over the course of the last year. The league did not see him the same way media analysts and mock drafters did, period. If they did, he would have been picked in the first round. And so once they determined, based on their evaluation, that he wasn't a starting NFL quarterback, he was more a backup or a very low-end starter, meaning a second-round grade, then they had to consider the overall. What are we getting in the kid? Well, he didn't interview with many people. He didn't show up and work out in places that a lot of other players did. He treated this situation, as did the people around him, including his father, as if he was a de facto first overall pick in the draft, or certainly in competition for it. And he wasn't. He just wasn't. They completely misplayed their situation. I've read a lot here over the last few days that suggests that the fact that they didn't have an agent and they were very much in their own little bubble rather than having an NFL agent that could have said to them, look, you need to go to the combine. You need to interview with more than just a couple of teams. You can't pick where you're going to go. You're not Eli Manning. Eli Manning was a legitimate upper-tier first-round quarterback the way he was evaluated. You're not him. And I've read a lot in recent days about how people have come to the conclusion that not having an actual NFL agent that could have laid out the situation, the reality of the situation, rather than perhaps, Shadur and his family, including his father and those around him, relying on media speculation about where he might go. An agent would have been able to say, you're viewed right now as a second rounder, so you've got to really interview well. You've got to show up and work out. You've got to basically interview for a first round opportunity. And that's not what Shadur Sanders did. And when he did it, according to all reports, the interviews did not go well. There was an arrogance and there was a presumption by him that the teams would be lucky to get him rather than he would be lucky to have an opportunity to play for them. And that did not sit well. And then you just factor in the three-ring circus that Colorado football has been the last 2 years, and that Dion and the Sanders and Travis Hunter and all of them have been over the last 2 years. By the way, I think good for the sport. I think it's been very good for college football, no doubt, the last 2 years. But if you are going to bring that into your building, then you have to believe that he's got a chance to be your starting quarterback for years to come. If you don't believe that, then you don't go for the player that's going to bring everything else in, and he's a backup quarterback. Backup quarterbacks have to immerse themselves into the culture of the team. They have to understand, where they are and not elevate themselves beyond where they are. Certainly they strive to become the starter, competitive, but they just didn't want it. It was a juice worth the squeeze situation once they evaluated him as something other than a first-round talent. There was no blackballing of Shadur Sanders. There was no collusion. This league is about winning, okay? It doesn't matter. If your talent is there, we've seen it over and over again. There can be many questions about character, many questions about the characters around you. But if you're a legit first-round talent, you're going in the first round. They did not see him that way. This from Mark. Mark wrote off the conversation yesterday that we were having about sort of the state of the NFC. And I said that the NFC is actually better and deeper than the AFC. The AFC, you really have three excellent teams in Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore. In the NFC, you've got a lot more than that. You have your two NFC championship teams in the NFC East, Philadelphia and Washington. It's nice to say. You've got an NFC North top to bottom, maybe the best division in football, with Detroit certainly at the top, but Green Bay very good, Minnesota coming off a 14-win season, and Chicago actually, in many ways, in this offseason, kind of going all in, believing that year two and the first under Ben Johnson, year two of Caleb Johnson, of Caleb Williams, can be a winning season and a playoff season. Tampa just keeps winning enough games to make the postseason under Todd Bowles. And in the West, you've got the Rams, who I think right now have been sort of very underrated in terms of their roster from an odds perspective. But we talked about, one of the power rankings, I think it was Yahoo or USA Today, having the Rams as the third best team in the league. That's the first time I've seen that. And we've been talking about the Rams roster for a while, and we know how well coached they are. We know how good the quarterback is when he's healthy. They got a good team, the Rams do. And the 49ers are still thought to be, by odds makers anyway, fully healthy, a contender. The NFC is just deeper and better than the AFC. Of course, that can change. We could be saying something completely different when we get to mid-November or early November, and they've played 7 or 8 games already. But Mark writes, Kevin, so if the NFC is so much better, doesn't that lead to the possibility of a year 2 Jaden Daniels step back season? Well, I don't know if it leads to a Jaden Daniels step back season. What it could lead to, given the teams they're playing, the opponents that they have, and it's always about when you play an opponent, not the opponent themselves. But yeah, there's a possibility that the team could be a better team in year 2, but have a worse record. They won 12 games last year, with many of them coming in the last few seconds. I hear this all the time, and not to, bust the mathematical or statistics and probability bubble that so many of the people out there seem to believe they have. when I hear, well, they won all these games by close games. That can't happen. Again, there will be what they refer to as a regression to the mean. I love that. All these are independent events. The fact that Washington had all of these close games doesn't mean it can't happen in the next season. In fact, the reason they won all of those close games last year was the same quarterback that's coming back this year in his second year, and hopefully a season in which they're even more comfortable. You know, CJ Stroud's sophomore slump season corresponded with that offensive line having major struggles in Houston. Washington upgraded their offensive line, at least on paper they did, with the addition of Laramie Tunsil and maybe the drafting of Josh Connerly Jr. I don't see, as long as he's perfectly healthy, I don't see like this light bulb that went on in the heads of defensive coordinators throughout the league that, you know, gives them the answer to making Jaden Daniels look like something we didn't see last year. I don't see that. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying that everything I watched last year seems like it's repeatable and even potentially better in year two. You know, we've talked about this. You know, what are the real flaws? You know, there's some footwork issues. We've heard that discussed. There's some decision-making, issues. But how about giving him a better offensive line, which they went out and did, and giving him maybe a better overall rush attack that doesn't involve him as the primary rusher? And let's see what this offense can be. I'm excited about the offense. I don't see a step back year for Jaden Daniels. I think it's very possible that there is a season next year that doesn't involve 12 regular season wins. But the number that we discussed yesterday, and it has come down in spots to 9.5 post-draft. You know, BetMGM and others right now have Washington's over-under win total for 2025 at 9.5 games. It's their highest since 2000. It was at 10.5, but let's just go with 9.5 right now. We are now through much of the offseason. There are still possibilities. We talked about some of them yesterday. Zadarius Smith. I am sort of a fan of at least checking in to see whether or not Nick Chubb is healthy and willing to come to Washington. Washington is much more of a destination than it's ever been for a player like Nick Chubb. J.K. Dobbins is out there. He's younger. You're talking about two players that are consistently hurt and get hurt, but when they are healthy, they are dynamic backs. I think Chubb more so than J.K. Dobbins, in my opinion. But there are other players out there. Justin Simmons is out there. There are players that are still available. But at this point, much of the offseason is completed, and the roster that we're looking at right now in terms of, as they're approaching a 90-player depth chart after the draft and after the signing of undrafted free agents, and the addition of a kicker. By the way, that could have been a very big acquisition, Matt Gay. If he can kick at the level that he's kicked at when he's kicked at his best, given how many close games there were last year, he could become a massive factor in 2025. But at 9.5 right now, post-draft, as the over-under number for win total, where would you go? Higher or lower? Over or under? 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. The number right now for Washington entering 2025, win total, is 9.5. Do you think they'll win 10 or more games, or do you think they'll win 9 or less? That's the over-under bet. Which way are you going and why? 301-230-0980. I'll give you my answer when we come back, and Max will also. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. All right, phone lines are open 301-230-0980. Washington's off season is mostly done. There could be more to come. But what are your sort of post-draft, post-free agency, much of it, thoughts on next year's team? I've kind of laid out the situation in the NFC. There's some depth in the NFC and some really good teams, including the defending champions. Washington's over-under win total is 9.5. That's down from where it was pre-draft in a lot of spots. There were some spots that had it at 9.5. But would you go over 9.5 wins or under 9.5 wins? I'm sure we'll do this again as we get towards training camp or during training camp. But right now, I want to, learn from you in terms of what you think about 2025. I do think that there's some fear out there about a sophomore slump season for Jaden Daniels. You can vote, by the way, if you want to. I put up a Twitter poll, X poll, at Kevin Sheehan DC. It's simple, just over or under 9.5 wins. I'll give you my answer before we get to the phone lines, which we do have a line open at 301-230-0980 if you want to weigh in. I'm going over 9.5, but let me just make sure that I'm clear about one thing. I think 12 is going to be a tough feat to match from last year. I just look at, the schedule, and I'm not a big schedule guy typically, other than having fun with it over the next week at this time. Probably my mock schedule. Next week, maybe early the following week. May 14th, I think, is the date that it comes out. So it's just that when you've got Mahomes and Justin Herbert and Tua and Jalen Hurts twice and Jared Goff in the Lions offense and Sean Payton, Bo Nix in the Broncos and whatever, Seattle's going to throw at you with Sam Darnold, and I would probably put that to a lesser extent. You probably have to include Dak in the 2 games against him. You have, at least on paper going in, if you get the teams on your schedule that play like they did last year, it's just going to be a little bit tougher, and the tough part of it will be that you're going to just face a slew of better quarterbacks. And your weakness last year was defense. Doesn't mean it will be in 2025. I don't see 12 wins right now, but I definitely see 10. So I would go over 9.5. I think if last year was one of those fluke seasons that NFL teams have that Washington really never had, but where they win 11 games with, an average to, subpar quarterback, and they won a playoff game and then lost one, I think I'd probably look at under. But as long as number 5 is the quarterback, and I also have great confidence in the coaching staff after 1 year overall. Cliff Kingsbury in particular in that offense, I just don't see taking a major step back. I think Debo could be a massive weapon for this team. I think they've got better pass protection at the very least with Laramie Tunsil. I see over 9.5, and I see probably around 10 or 11 wins. 12 might be difficult. And, the Eagles, by the way, have a similar situation where it's not going to be much easier for them. It'll be more difficult for them. That's the race in the NFC East. I don't look at Dallas and think, they've got a better team on paper. I felt that way last year. I don't feel that way this year. I look at the Giants and I see an absolute, really good roster on defense, but you still have major quarterback questions. So I would go over 9.5, not under it, even though I don't see 12 wins necessarily next year. Max, where would you go?
I think Vegas has done a really, really good job at setting this line. Just looking at the schedule next year, it's going to be tough. Like the NFC North and the AFC West, 2 of the top divisions in football. It's going to be a dogfight. This team, the way it's constructed right now, I feel like they're going to try and win games like 50-45. But for that reason, I have a tough time going over, but I think it's going to be really, I think they're going to be somewhere around 9 wins. So for that, I'm going to go under. But The closer we get to the season, that could change. But right now, I'm just going with my gut. I think they're going to have somewhere. I think it's going to be 9-win season this year.
All right. So you're just slightly under.
Just a little bit.
Just so you know, Washington's over-under number at 9.5 is one game short of Detroit and San Francisco on average. This is kind of a consensus of all of the over-unders on multiple sites. I mean, San Francisco is still, odds makers have a really good feeling for this team. It's all about them staying healthy. You know, if they put their best players on the field consistently over a 17-game season, they'll be better than they were last year. Detroit's at 10.5, and then there are 4 teams at 11.5. The top 3 teams in the AFC, Baltimore, Buffalo, and Kansas City, and then Philadelphia. In the 9.5 win total, Washington, Tampa, the Rams, the Packers, the Bengals are at 9.5. The Broncos are at 9.5. Houston and the Chargers are as well. You know, one of the reasons, too, that Washington's 9.5 number, maybe, you know, based on last year, isn't slightly higher, is Washington has, as do the other NFC East teams, they have the NFC North, which you could argue going into the season is the best division in football top to bottom. Doesn't always work out that way. And they have the AFC West. So they are playing Detroit, Minnesota, Chicago, and Green Bay. And they are playing Kansas City, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Broncos. So in addition to the division teams, that's what they have. And then you end up with 3 other games. In their case, they've got games against Seattle at home, Miami on the road, which could be Madrid, possibly. And then they also play Atlanta on the road. And that's based on where they finished in their division. All right, 301-230-0980. Over 9.5 wins, under 9.5 wins, and why. This is, you know, we're at that point in which the rosters are pretty much set. Not completely, still things that can happen. But for the most part, we now know what this team will look like on paper, roster-wise, heading into training camp. And their numbers at 9.5. You going over or under? Let's start with Scott. Scott, go ahead.
Good morning, Kevin. How you doing?
I'm well, Scott.
Hello?
I'm well, Scott. How are you?
Good, thanks. I'm saying under for a lot of the reasons you just brought up. The schedule's going to be difficult with the NFC North, AFC West. And then they have to play the second place teams in the division. Miami, I'm not too worried about. I'm also concerned about the improvements they made on the defense. I don't know if they've done enough, but we still have some time to see if they get some pass rusher in free agency. I think Jaden's going to be fine. He seems like the type of guy, he knows how to, he sees things. If something's not working, he can adjust. I think he's going to have a good year. I think the offense is still going to be good, but I just don't think the defense is going to improve enough to really get them better than 8 or 9 wins.
Yeah.
I also think they have a target on their back now. You know, the year before last, they were a 4-win team, and we were seen as rebuilding, and all of a sudden we win 12 wins or 12 games. But if you cut me off, I just wanted to say I've been listening to you for a long time. I really like the history of radio and stuff, and you're a great broadcaster.
Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate it. You know, something that you said is I think if you are just taking it at, I'm looking at this roster, I know what it was last year, I know some of the players they added, you just say, look, offensively, they should be really good. They got Jaden Daniels, and they upgraded on their offensive line. They added another playmaker in Deebo Samuel. At times last year, this was as good an offensive football team as any in the league. They certainly finished as a top 5 kind of overall offensive football team. They're going to score, and they're going to be tough to stop. But defensively, they weren't very good last year, even though they had some good players. And it doesn't appear to me like they did enough during the offseason. To me, that is an absolute reasonable position for us outside looking in to take. How they feel, I think they feel differently about what they've added defensively. I think they feel like some of the pieces they added are perfect fits for what they're trying to do, whether it's a Kinlaw or a Wise or even an Eddie Goldman or a Jonathan Jones, etc. I think they feel good about what they've done defensively. And I think, there is an understanding, because this is a bright group, that, one season of bad defense does not mean the next season, even if you don't add significant, upgraded personnel, doesn't mean you're going to be bad again. But that's a reasonable position right now for all of us on the outside looking in. Should be a great offensive team. Jaden's a legitimate MVP candidate, right? He's the 5th pick right now, odds-wise, to win the MVP. You'll see as we go through the summer and approach the regular season, you'll see a lot of people out there predicting Jaden to win the MVP. I mean, I'm not saying more so than Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, but there will be a lot of people saying Jaden Daniels is going to win the first MVP award of his career. When's the last time we had that? Never. RG3, there were certainly thoughts during his rookie season that we were watching a guy that would eventually win an MVP. Dead wrong. This guy's a different guy overall. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. We are through much of the offseason. Washington's over-under win total is 9.5. Are you going over or under? Let's go to Lou in D.C. Lou, what's up?
Kevin, what's going on, man?
What's going on,
How you been? Everything good?
Everything's good, brother.
Yeah, I'm gonna say over. I'll go as far as going to 13 because I think the defense got better. That's number one. Last year our number one corner was Benjamin St. Jude. So trust me, Jonathan Jones is way better than him, and Will Harris. That's another addition to the defensive side of the ball, and as far as the D line, I think we added a good piece of who could stop the run as well. So I think we got better, and as far as Jaden goes, he got a bunch of weapons for him, the O line and Debo and some of the rookie guys that we got. So I think we got better. I felt like we could go 13-4, if not 14-3. That's how I'm looking at it.
All right.
I just don't see.
Lou, you've always been super glass half full optimistic. When you said Jonathan Jones, to me, it would be, if they're much better at corner, it's because Trey Amos, their second round pick, turned out to be ready to play like Sanders still was last year. But more importantly than that Marshawn Lattimore came back healthy, prepared, acclimated, and ready to play football at a high level. Because talent-wise, at corner, Marshawn Lattimore is still, the best talent they have at corner on the roster. So we got to see Marshawn Lattimore be Marshawn Lattimore. If you tell me right now Marshawn Lattimore has a year like some of the years he had in New Orleans, the defense got a lot better. No doubt.
One more addition, if they could add either Von Miller or Darius Smith, and I think that will put us to the hump, to try to get to 14 or 15 wins. So, look, man, I think we got better. People, say they nervous, the defense, this and that. I think we good, man. I think we could beat Philadelphia if we line up right now. So that's how I'm looking at it. I'm always optimistic.
Yes, you are.
Everything they doing right now is the right thing. So, yeah, man, thanks for taking my call, Kevin.
All right, Lou. Von Miller. Interesting. He's 36 years old, 37. He last year, because I looked this up the other day when I was looking up stuff on Zadarius Smith. I think he finished top 10 PFF in pass rushing pressure in grade last year. He was very sort of a specialized pass rushing guy for Buffalo last year. Yeah. Interesting, when the Rams added him, it worked out well for them in 2021. Von Miller is just a pro too, man. He is a pro. You bring him into your locker room, you don't have any issues. You've got a mentor for some of the other guys. You have Von Miller and Bobby Wagner in your locker room. That would be interesting. Zadarius Smith, interesting. Zadarius Smith could be an all-down kind of, edge for them if they went that way. Von Miller is going to be a pass rush specialist. I think that's the way I would view him if they brought him in. How old is Von Miller now?
36.
36 years old. I was right. Going to be 37. Last year, all right, here it is. Last year, 11th best pass rushing grade on PFF. I said top 10, so it was 11th. 6 sacks on 209 pass rushing snaps, 32 pressures, and 23 QB hits. He's a pass rusher, man. He has always been a high level, and at times in his career, an elite pass rusher. There's still something out there for them to add. And the difference between thinking about players like Zadarius Smith and Von Miller and Nick Chubb and J.K. Dobbins, etc., is that they're not, they're answering the phone. Where we went through, years and years where, I'm not going to D.C. I'm not going to go to that train wreck. And now they're looking at it as got a chance to compete for a Super Bowl. 301-230-0980. Joe, Billy, Robert, Rod, Dennis. Stay on hold. We got a line open if you want to weigh in at 301-230-0980. This is, putting our finger up to the wind and taking a test here. Where are we after much of the offseason is in the books? Over 9.5 wins, under 9.5 wins, and why? Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980. And the team980.com.
All right, last night, the Nats, they avoid the sweep. They beat the Phillies 4-2. Brad Lord gets his first win of the season, and Kyle Finnegan closes out with the save. The Nats, will take on the Reds tonight. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave starts at 5:40 on 106.7 The Fan. The New York Rangers have hired former Penguins bench boss Mike Sullivan. This is a homecoming for Mike, as he was drafted by the Rangers in round 4 of the 1987 NHL draft. NBA, the Knicks close out the Pistons last night, 116-113. Jalen Brunson caps off a 40-point game with the winning 3 in the final seconds. The Clippers forced Game 7, 111-105 over the Denver Nuggets. James Harden played 47 of 48 minutes and put up 28, 6, and 8. The only one game tonight between the Rockets and Warriors. Steph Curry is battling through a thumb injury. He is expected to play. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
at 11 a.m. today. And Phil Mendelson, the D.C. City Council chairman, will join us at 12 noon. We'll talk about the state of, where they are. How much have they learned about this deal? The term sheet's out there for anybody to read. And then, when will that vote take place? Where are they right now on the city council? The need is for 7 votes. You heard Joe Maloney on the show yesterday, the former vice president of group affairs for the team, consumer affairs for the team, public affairs for the team, who was the point person on the stadium stuff for a while. He thinks there will be at least 10 council members that will vote. He does not think it'll be particularly close. But how much does the current term sheet, the current deal, how much of that will look like the final deal? I'm sure there are plenty on the city council that would like to at least put their fingerprints on it and say, we got involved and we got a better deal. I think this thing is headed towards being voted yes on. I'd be shocked if it fell apart like the deal to Potomac Yards did. Shocked if that happened. But we will talk to Phil Mendelson at noon. Right now, 9.5 is the number for Washington's wins in 2025. We are through much of the offseason. There's still possibilities, a Zadarius Smith or a Von Miller or maybe a running back. Who knows? But what you see right now is, for the most part, what you will get. Are you going over 9.5 or under 9.5 wins? 301-230-0980. We talked about the poll that's out there. You can vote at Kevin Sheehan DC. At this point, over 9.5 is at 85.2% of the vote. 301-230-0980. Joe's been on hold for a while. Joe, are you going over or under 9.5?
Hey, Kevin. Oh, by the way, real quick, I'll see you Monday, May 19th at Shelley's Back Room. Looking forward to that event. Should be a good night for it.
Yeah, be fun.
So I will say over 9.5. I'm going to go with 10 or 11 wins. I mean, like you, I agree. The offense is going to be great with Jaden Lee and the charge. The defense, I'm still a little concerned about. Hopefully they get 1 or 2 more additions. But because it's amazing last year how we were able to pull off those wins with the defense averaging or allowing, was it 6 or 7 yards per carry for run? I mean, the fact we still got 12 wins out of that because we had a good offense is good. But can we do that again? Who knows? And I believe the wins will come if they come up in walk-off fashion again like we did last year. I mean, but 6 walk-off wins, 3 of them were against our division rivals. I mean, Kevin, how often in the past have we been victimized on the last play by our division rivals, having them pull off wins against us? So for once, it felt good to do that. But yeah, 10 or 11 wins, I'm going to go over. I mean, it's going to be tough with the games we got, especially the NFC North, and especially against Patrick Mahomes and Sean Payton in Denver and Justin Herbert for the Chargers. But let's go. Let's see what happens. I mean, it's going to be tough, but I'll say over.
Yeah. One of the things, too, given how many primetime games they're going to get, one of the, things that, and I'm forgetting who it is that puts together, it may be Warren Sharp, that puts together that net rest days study after the schedule comes out. Net rest days are essentially a result of how many days you have between games. And there's, when you go through the whole season and you look at the schedule, now games get flexed and they get moved, so you don't know for sure. But teams with higher net rest days end up having an advantage over teams with lower or negative net rest days. Washington's going to play in some big-time primetime spots. They're going to play in some Thursday games. Sometimes that means an extended rest opportunity after a short rest opportunity. Sometimes it means coming off a bye, you'll play on Thursday night, which is a huge net rest advantage rather than playing on a Sunday and then playing on a Thursday. So a lot of those things we'll look at, but the schedule on paper, because of the teams they play, NFC North, AFC West, their own division, which includes Philadelphia twice, looks tougher, but that is a real dangerous game to play year in and year out. We've talked about it for years. You guys know it. I know it. You get to, December and it's like, man, the games we thought were losses we won. The games we thought were easy wins, we lost because the teams were different than the way they were viewed going in. And sometimes when you played that team mattered a lot. Let's go to Robert in Annapolis. Robert, over or under 9.5?
All right, Kevin, well, I'm going to do this as a smell test. What'd you say, 85% are going over? So I'll go the other way and take the under on that. Does
Okay,
that make
other
sense?
than just being a contrarian, what are the reasons?
Well, they've been mentioned. I think the big thing is, first of all, they're going to face a lot of good quarterbacks. I don't really look at the teams they're facing. I typically really focus more on the quarterback.
Me too.
And like the others mentioned, the Achilles heel last year was the defense, and I don't think that's healed yet. So we'll see what happens. But also, you've often mentioned how the NFL draft is such a crapshoot. You know, of the 32 first-round picks in the 2022 draft, you want to take a stab at how many? Well, actually, one player was extended, Stingley, but of the other 31, do you know how many had their options picked up?
Because the 2022 draft is options being picked up by just the other day. What was the number? I don't know.
They had to be picked up by yesterday.
Yes. What was the number?
18.
Yeah. That's actually
now,
about...
Linderbaum over here in Baltimore, they didn't do it because it's a number thing with the center being bunched in with the offensive lineman. So it's better to not pick that option up. They're going to do a deal with him, or they could franchise him for less money. But just think of that. That's about a 60% hit rate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the average since they put the 5th-year option in, and I think I talked about this, or last week or earlier this week, is just over 59% are either extended or the 5th-year options picked up on drafts going back to 2011 through through 2021, which was the data they had until yesterday. So it hit right about the same rate.
But I've always considered the NFL draft to be the false prophet of fan optimism for their team. You never know where these guys are going to go, No,
100%. And that's the first round. They hit right on rounds 2 through 7, much lower, which brings basically the overall average. That's judged on 5th-year option pickups, which are only applicable to first rounders. But the PFF study that they did a few years ago on snap counts by position a few years after the draft, like a good hit rate is somewhere around 37-38%.
They also have too many rounds. How many rounds do you think they actually should have for the draft? Let those other guys.
7's fine.
I think 7 is still those 6 and 7 rounders. I think 5 rounds is what they should do, and let those other guys actually pick their team where they may have a better shot of actually latching on.
You're old enough to remember when it was 12. I mean, it was 12 for a long time.
Kevin, I'm old enough to remember when it was 18.
Yeah. Well, wasn't Unitas like an 18th round pick or something like that?
I can't. He was picked by the Steelers. Bart Starr was like an 18th or 5th. But keep in mind there were fewer teams, so those numbers don't necessarily correlate.
Exactly.
All right, I know you're up against it, and you have other
calls. All right, thanks, Robert.
Kevin.
Dennis and Frederick. Dennis, go ahead. Over or under 9.5?
Hey, Kevin. It's under for me, and the reason is multiple, and they've all been mentioned. But the first one is they won, the last 5 games, 6 overall, on the last play of the game or the last possession of the game.
Yes.
And that's kind of like turnovers. They even out. They're not going to do that this year, and that would have been a 7-win team if they'd have lost those games. Now, I'm going to look at.
They also lost a game to Pittsburgh that they could have easily won. They had Dallas dead to right if the extra point, is made. And they played
all
true.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that means that playing their schedule last year, they were lucky to get 12. I would say that at least. They have a great offense, but I'm with you, man. That running game needs to be improved for them to be like elite, like Philly.
Yeah.
And their defense. Lattimore was a terrible disappointment, and if their secondary isn't better, there is no way that they win 12 games or even 10 games next year. Now, I'm hopeful, And I hope they do get somebody who can rush the passer a little bit better. And they will be a better team. And do I think that there'll really be 10 wins? I'm hopeful. But they could possibly be a better team and only win 9 games this year. And they'd still be a better team.
Thanks for the call, Dennis. Appreciate it. The one thing that I would just say about those that are going to, profess to be stats and probability experts, which most of these people are not. The idea that, they had all of these walk-off close wins, and that means it won't happen next year. It's just not, there's no mathematical explanation for that. There's no regression to the mean in a conversation like this. All of these seasons, all of these games are independent events. And I would suggest that the reason Washington was really good in games that were close coming down the stretch is the same reason they are likely to be very good coming down the stretch in games that are close in 2025. And that is they have a special quarterback, and the quarterback makes all the difference in those moments, as he did, as Mahomes does, as Josh Allen does. So I hear you, like, the Hail Mary. Are you going to have another Hail Mary next year? No, there's probably not going to be a Hail Mary win. But are you going to hang in there with 5 turnovers and still have a chance to beat Philly because your quarterback is great? Maybe. Are you going to drive right down the field in overtime against Atlanta because your quarterback is incredible? Yeah, there's a pretty good chance that might happen next year once or twice. All right. Those of you I didn't get to, I apologize. Maybe we'll come back to this later on in the show. Ben Standig will join us next. If you've never been to a rugby match, the one you should go to is this Sunday. Old Glory DC brings serious intensity. We're talking big hits, fast breaks, and nonstop action. Trust me, it's the real deal. These guys are flying all over the field. The hits are loud. You can hear them, and the energy in the stands is awesome from start to finish. This Sunday, Old Glory is back home at the Maryland Soccerplex, taking on the Utah Warriors. Kickoffs at 2 p.m. and it's Kids Day, so bring the whole family. There are inflatables, face painting, games, post-game autographs with the players, and more. It's an incredible experience for the kids and the adults. You've got the perfect setup for an incredible Sunday outside. Now, whether you're a longtime rugby fan or just looking for something different and exciting and new, this is it. Rugby is awesome. If you're a football fan, you'll love rugby. The hits are real, the action never stops, and the crowd makes it feel like a party from the moment you walk in. Get your tickets for Sunday now at oldglorydc.com. That's oldglorydc.com. Great rugby, great weather, and a great time for the whole family. Old Glory DC, let's scrum together. Ben Standig's with us, as he is every Monday and Friday, a little bit earlier today, because Phil Mendelson, the city council chairman, will call in at 12 noon. I know that before we talk some football, you wanted to talk about LeBron's next move after the Lakers were ousted the other night. So what are your theories? Is he going to retire? Is he going to leave L.A., or is he going to stay in L.A.?
I was just kind of messing around here. So here's the theory. I mean, obviously staying in LA would be simple and whatever, or retiring would be easy. Here's my theory. The Lakers roster, obviously, he's got Luka, but there's, they got a lot of flaws, no size, all that stuff. He just was playing with Anthony Davis, who he cited in his post-game press conference. I mean, silliness by LeBron, but he mentions Anthony Davis said something that he felt they needed, and then he got traded a week later. He got traded to Dallas. Who else is on Dallas? Kyrie Irving, LeBron has constantly been trying to get back with him after all these years. That Dallas team also has Klay Thompson, who's won as many rings as him, Jason Kidd, who, as the coach, who beat LeBron in the finals once with Dallas. It's also got all those mobile, really good big men that LeBron would seemingly like to have after not having any of it here this playoff run. They also have an owner in Dallas who, people aren't the biggest fans of, but they have a lot of ties to Las Vegas. That's where they made their money, and LeBron is constantly mentioned as the guy who's going to be connected to the Vegas expansion team whenever that were to happen. Mark Cuban is still around there. I can see LeBron doesn't need Mark Cuban's help to get on Shark Tank, but having that type of connection with a guy like that, I don't think would hurt. So, and last but not least, LeBron has an opt-out for his contract this year. So, yeah, he would be giving up some money realistically, but if he signs a multi-year deal, maybe he's not long-term. And obviously the money, the legacy matters more, you would think, i.e. the rings. Not to say that Dallas is the automatic team to go to for rings, but at the same time, that we're in the finals 2 years ago, and if they're healthy, who knows? There you go.
Has LeBron been on Shark Tank before?
No, but Barkley has, A-Rod has. Like they've gone the celebrity route, but
yes. I watched Shark Tank a lot, and I didn't think when you mentioned that, I wasn't sure if you were saying that Mark Cuban got LeBron on Shark Tank. I don't think I've ever seen him on Shark Tank.
No, but I mean, clearly that's, his next evolution once he's already kind of gone in this direction, but, he's going to be all in on being the business mogul guy. And, there is, it is a good way for a guy like him to immediately get credibility in that space by, going on that show and associating yourself, and Mark Cuban sitting right there.
If you had a really good idea for a business and you pitched it on Shark Tank, and let's just say every single shark was interested, and you could pick any of the sharks to, fund your deal, who would you pick?
Of the normal ones, you mean?
Yeah, of the normal ones. Of Mr. Wonderful Kevin, Mark Cuban, Lori, Robert, and Damon. I guess those would be the regulars, right? And Barbara.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, clearly Cuban would be a fun one, especially, with what we do. I mean, but like Lori, I feel like would be the one I would like trust the most. / if it's anything remotely retail, I'd go her.
Yeah, for sure. If you've got just like a retail product, it would be Lori. But overall, even though Cuban sometimes, especially over the last couple of years, has been a bit much on social media, I think he'd be actually pretty easy to work with and would be great as sort of a mentor. Is there somebody you wouldn't work with?
Well, look, I'm not a business guy, but Mr. Wonderful, nah. Hard pass.
I actually would do something with him. I don't think I'd want to do anything with Barbara. I think she's the least impressive out of all of them.
He seems like a tough hang at times for sure, but Mr. Wonderful with all the royalties and
he
he's
wants
like
royalties.
He's just openly admitting he's basically going to try to screw you at some point. He's going to make you money maybe, but at some point he's going to mess with you. So no, I'm out on Mr. Wonderful.
Robert's a bit goofy too. I don't think I'd want to do a deal with him.
He might be one like you'd want to like hang with, but not necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Lori and Cuban I think, by the way, Lori by far and away has produced the largest return on investment of any of the Sharks. I think that's true, right? You probably, I know you love the show too.
I'm not positive. I've always looked over the years because it's always kind of hard to tell because what we see on TV doesn't always necessarily equate to the deals that actually get done or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I would think you're right. I mean, it's always interesting to see the deals they didn't get.
Yeah.
As much as
the ring, they didn't do ring. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. So those are the ones that are always kind of interesting for sure. You should. You're an entrepreneur. You should get on there.
I wonder what are the biggest Shark Tank deals? For whatever reason, I think she has like 3 of the top 4 of all time in terms of success. There was that cleaning thing, and then there was that thing called like Squatty Potty or something like that did really well.
Love Squatty Potty. I have one in my house.
You do?
I sure do.
That did very well, I think. Very well.
It crushes. It's great. Free ad.
Scrub Daddy was the one I was trying to come up with. Scrub Daddy.
I also use that.
Yeah, Lori Greiner has invested in 2 out of the 3 most successful Shark Tank ventures, Everlywell and Scrub Daddy. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk some sports.
Socks, which I think Bomba Socks, like I always hear get advertised. Yeah. Maybe even on these stations.
Who funded that? I forget. Was that Damon?
I don't know.
I think it was Damon.
I don't know. I just think makes sense. He's a fashion guy.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Man, that show's on a lot, isn't it?
It's sort of the Law and Order of, not reality shows, but these kinds of shows. Like you can find it anywhere. CNBC, I think that's all it runs at night.
Well, CNBC is pretty much it's all it runs. It seems like pretty much after the market's closed, and then you get it on network television on ABC. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually probably watch the replays more than I do the actual live show.
Me too.
Kind of like how you do The Simpsons.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, we just took calls for 2 segments on the updated over-under win total at 9.5, and kind of recognizing that the significant majority of the offseason's over. It's not completely over. But it's for the most part over. Would you go over or under 9.5?
Oh boy! All right. Well, I'll dispense with the caveats because clearly you've done that in terms of schedule and what things went right last year and all that. Look, I guess if I'm going to go logically, I would probably have to go under. I mean, just so much went right last year. Obviously, Jaden Daniels could absolutely, propel this team back to a double-digit win season, no doubt. But I don't know. We've got to see. At least I need to see more with the defenses to determine whether I think they really have improved. The schedule is going to be that much harder of the 2 divisions that they play the NFC North and AFC West, 6 of the 8 teams made the playoffs. So, by logic, I'd say under, but, it's a good number. I mean, to say they win 10 games would not be crazy or anything. It's just based on how they've improved the offense, Jaden Daniels, et cetera.
Last year, at this time, I don't think anybody predicted Jahan Dotson would get traded, right? This was not in the conversation at all, Jahan Dotson getting traded. In fact, more of the conversation was with Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels, maybe Jahan Dotson can become a real, significant part of the offense as a former first-round pick. But ultimately, he got traded. Do you see any? And look, last year's roster, they were completely making over. Is there a Jahan Dotson out there for this year? A player that we're not thinking about right now that will either get traded or released? I mean, we'll have our, surprise cuts, but I'm thinking more about trading. Is there a player that you think fits that Jahan Dotson description?
Yeah, ironically, I've got a mailbag coming out Monday, so maybe I don't step on it and I actually get into some of this. I'll just throw out maybe one that's a little more obvious than sort of what you're going for here, and that's just like Andrew Wiley. Obviously he's been traded over twice this offseason now. So,
yeah.
He's a guy that started the last 2 years. There's teams out there that still need offensive line, offensive tackle help. Not that this team couldn't use them, right? I mean, even if Brandon Coleman does move inside, you still would need a third guard behind, particularly behind Josh Connerly. So I'm not saying like they need to, but yeah, I mean, if a team is willing to give you something, they only have the 5 draft picks next year. It might be something you would have to consider rolling the dice. They have other tackle options. He would be one of the better ones that they would have, and I can't imagine there's much left in free agency. So we'll see what happens come the summer, right? Somebody gets hurt, et cetera. So yeah, to me, that would be one that would be a little obvious. I do think there's maybe another one out there that I'll get into on Monday. We can talk.
You got another one. I think the Wiley one made a lot of sense to me right when you said it.
Yeah.
Now I'm interested. Is the other one a corner?
A corner. Maybe. Not necessarily.
So you're going to tell us on Monday?
Yeah, I'll tell you on Monday. But yeah,
okay.
I think Wiley is a good enough one for now because, like I said, I haven't done like the full count of every tackle situation in the league. But, one of the reasons why it seemed to make sense that they could go tackle in the first round before they did was because there was very few viable tackles, considered to be, non-projects, guys who could come in and play in this draft. And, clearly some teams just didn't get them and have questions and, need some immediate help. So, yeah, I think the Wiley one is interesting. Again, we'll see how they decide to execute. Part of it will also be how quickly is Sam Cosmi coming back, things like that.
Who's more likely to be a week 1 starter? Connerly Jr. or Trey Amos? And by the way, when I say starter, he would be part of just say the 3 DBs that would see the field when they're in nickel.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say Connerly, right? I mean, we know that, on the offensive line, you're not like subbing guys in and out. So, if he can be ready, you'd probably want to get him going. Now, look, if he's not, then you still have Wiley, of course, and we'll see if they move Coleman straight inside or give him a chance to really win that right tackle spot. Amos could absolutely do it, but you already have, Jonathan Jones, you have Sanders still, obviously, Marshawn Lattimore. So, I think and all those guys are going to play. So it could, you can get Amos playing without having him to start, so I'll go Connerly.
What's the rotation up front D-line wise when we get to week 1? Just take a stab at it.
Well, obviously you would think Payne and Newton on the inside. Now, in terms of the edge, I mean, they signed Javon Kinlaw for a reason. And the notion of him playing out on the edge and setting that, I think makes a lot of sense. I'm going to guess he'd be on one edge with Dorrance Armstrong on the other on early downs. Then when you get to more passing situations, Dietrich Wise, who I think is also can be helpful on early downs. Probably he's more of that option. They really just don't have, sort of an obvious pass rusher type. But I would say that would make sense. And then interior, Eddie Goldman is there to stop the run. So is that going to be just, 3rd and 1 situations, or is he going to actually play more on early downs and maybe Johnny Newton comes in more as a sort of pass rusher type guy? I would kind of hope not. You want that Newton to be as every down as possible. So
right.
that would be my general thoughts. You go look, then you have a Jacob Martin who is here primarily to get after the passer. You've got Cleveland Farrell, who is probably better against the run. But I would, the Kinlaw part to me is the fascinating part. How much is he actually going to play on the edge?
I agree.
And if he's not, then what does that mean? If he's playing tackle more, who's sitting? Obviously that no tackle is playing, even necessarily 80% of the snaps most games. But at the same time, if you're paying that guy what they paid him and brought him in, you want to have more of an impact than just playing, 20, 30 snaps a game.
I've asked you about last year's class, and I think you actually asked either Adam Peters or Dan Quinn about that, about last year's class and who they see making a contribution. Somebody asked him. Anyway, that's beside the point. We talked about which, players more likely to have a big kind of breakout year in year 2. I think, you've mentioned Jordan McGee. That makes sense. I want to know specifically about one player. What do you know about how they feel about Ben Sinnott?
Well, I think they, obviously got drafted in the second round with a specific purpose of being sort of an H-back type tight end, the way San Francisco had with Kyle Juszczyk and, George Kittle to some degree. I think the athlete is there. I think that's pretty clear that he's got, those tools, those traits, and they like that. I don't necessarily know how deep they are on this thought, but I'm just quite not sure yet what he is. Like if Ertz and Bates are both free agents, and I kept wondering if you said, okay, one of them is, you can't bring one of them back, which one do you want Ben Sinnott to replace? I'm not quite sure what my answer would be. He's not big enough to really be the blocker, but
it's not Bates. If you said it's one of the two, it would be Ertz. But I don't think he's an Ertz player either. I think his style, at least college-wise, is different.
That's what I'm saying. Is it's more not specifically based on Ertz, but is he the pass catcher or is he the blocker? And I don't know that there's really an answer for that at the moment. But this kind of goes to the point of drafting him in the first place. It was a little bit of a out of the box call. We knew that they needed more help at tight end, but to that end, what is it? I imagine they're hoping he's a guy they can turn into, help develop his route running skills and turn him into a guy that you can use all over the rotation, all over the formation. And and turn him into a weapon. Obviously, he did catch that Tress Way pass in the playoffs. So there's something there perhaps, but I think that to me is sort of a question, and one I imagine is that they still ponder is what is he? Because even after this year, right? Zach Ertz only signed a 1-year deal. Is Ben Sinnott going to develop into that replacement, or do they have to then go out and get somebody else? And hopefully, for everybody's sake, they figure out there's more obvious development this season, so they're not guessing next year. Not saying that they're guessing, but I certainly felt like I was guessing in terms of what he is, and I have to imagine to some degree they are.
When Tressaway made that pass to Ben Sinnott, that was such a great play, and the game was still a game at that point. They had overcome the 60-yard touchdown run on the first play from scrimmage, and they were still in that game. Every time I think about that game, 55-23, Philadelphia was the better team. Not even about to suggest that Washington was a better team than Philadelphia. They were not. But I still have a hard time believing that, and the score will forever be etched in stone because it's the final score of an NFC championship game. And it'll look like forever that Philadelphia destroyed Washington in the 2024 NFC title game. But they really didn't. They really didn't. Washington was in that game multiple times. And look, if Philly needed to score 65 to win the game, they would have. They weren't going to lose that game, but it wasn't a 32-point pounding. I digress. Thank you for the answer on Ben Sinnott. Do you think that they believe that they're okay in terms of replacing Dante Fowler Jr.'s 10.5 sacks with what they have on the roster right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think they look at it as the total package, and sure, those are 10.5, moments where he was able to get down, to get the quarterback down. But obviously, there's a lot more plays in a given game, and his struggles against the run ultimately, and just his overall level, ultimately led to him not playing much in the biggest game of the year. So I think they're probably okay with that. But yes, I mean, just in terms of like a pure pass rush scenario, hey, it's 3rd and long, go get this guy. I don't know that like they really have. I think they're still a bit deficient there. And I there are some names in free agency that you could feel better about if they brought in, but everybody out there is like just a 30-something that is not just necessarily past their prime, but probably a bit one-dimensional. I mean, Zadarius Smith is the obvious guy to bring in. He had 9.5 sacks, but he's going to be the obvious guy to 32 teams if whoever needs one. So the odds of it being here, and I don't necessarily know that that's if that's the fit. We'll see. And so yeah, I mean, I think my guess is like as a pure pass rusher, the answer is probably no. But in terms of overall defense, they probably feel fine with the exchange they made of Fowler for a few of these other guys.
All right, last one for Ben Standig joining us right now. Ben Standig has a podcast called Last Man Standing. He writes for The Athletic, and you can follow him on X at Ben Standig. So what else will they do between now and training camp? We've talked about Zadarius Smith. We've talked about Von Miller. You texted me and you said, why were you talking about Nick Chubb? I was just looking at the various players that are still out there. And some of those would be, 1-year incentive-laden deals that I think actually might be worth it. A, do you have a sense that they are still looking? B, make a prediction on somebody that they sign between now and camp.
I mean, yeah, I get the sense they're looking in the way that every team is looking kind of at all times, but I don't have any real sense that they, are dying to do anything. Again, if you look at the roster as a whole, not debating ceiling, but just debating sort of floor, they're kind of covered everywhere. I think the last positions where I would have said there's a real spot open, I would have probably said offensive line, linebacker, cornerback, and maybe receiver. Depending on how you view like the Michael Gallup, KJ Osborne scenario. So, they kind of don't have any obvious holes. I'm sure they'll bring in more people, in the context of, training camp competition. And, you always need some people. But, I don't know that I see anything, crazy. I mean, there's, until Trey Hendrickson signs the contract, I guess that's going to be, he seems to be rumored, but, I don't know that that's going anywhere from the Bengals end. And, you mentioned Nick Chubb, and, the running back room is one space, right? I've been a little bit more surprised at how little, I guess, they did. I mean, just the fact that Robinson, Eckler, and McNichols are all free agents after this year. Yeah, they drafted the kids in the 7th round. We'll see what that turns into. But I thought that was like one spot where maybe you look to add a little more explosive element. Of course, they did that. Maybe if you factor in Debo, who will play out of the backfield, right. Maybe that's the thing. So, but again, there's no running backs. Nick Chubb by name is great, but he's played 10 games since 2022 because of injuries. Right. So, yeah, I don't know if there's much out there, but yeah, they'll bring in some camp depth at a minimum. Beyond that, I'm not seeing a ton.
Actually, one more for you. The fact that they waited until after the draft to sign Matt Gay, that could have been also Matt Gay waiting until after the draft. But do you think that there was a chance that they could have drafted a kicker?
Yeah, no, I believe, my gut says they signed Josh Johnson before the draft because they knew they weren't going to use a pick on a quarterback, and therefore, if they wanted another one, get it in advance, beat the rush. Kicker, I think they were willing to wait because of the fact that, yes, they, I think, were open to, taking a kicker. I mean, they did work some of the ones who got drafted out. Again, ultimately maybe they were not going to when it came time to it. But yeah, I think the opportunity they preferred to give themselves the opportunity to draft somebody if it was there. And then once it wasn't, they immediately pivoted to probably the best veteran that's out there.
Are you watching The Last of Us?
I am not at the moment. I did watch season 1. I started watching the first episode. I'm not really back that into the zombie thing, and I thought last year they did a good mix of that. But I don't know. The first one all of a sudden felt zombie heavy, and I was like, I'll catch up later.
No,
so not
still character driven. I think it's really good, very good. I think you'll like it, especially if you watch season 1. All right, I'll talk to you later. Thanks.
Awesome, man. See ya.
Ben Standig, everybody. When we come back, JJ Redick, who's under some heat after the Lakers were ousted in 5 games, pretty much told the world yesterday what everybody always knew about Luka Doncic. You'll hear it next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com.
the work that's required in an off season to be in championship shape. You know, we have a ways to go as a roster, and certainly there are individuals that were in phenomenal shape. There's certainly other ones that could have been in better shape. That's where my mind goes immediately is you know, we have to get in championship shape.
That was J.J. Redick yesterday, kind of breaking down the season after the fact. A rough last week for J.J. Redick, including the meltdown and the walking off the dais press conference from the day before what turned out to be the game in which his team was eliminated at home by the Minnesota Timberwolves. That was, for anybody that's been paying attention, that was 100%. There was no gray area. That was calling out Luka Doncic for not being in, quote, championship shape, closed quote. That has been a knock against Luka throughout his career. It's one of the reasons I'm sure Dallas was looking for the possibility of moving on from him, which they did in one of the most stunning trades in the history of sports. When they moved on from him and traded him for Anthony Davis. Let me just say, despite how this trade looks in terms of does Dallas end up having success, does Luka in LA end up having success, it won't ever change the in-the-moment terrible trade for Dallas in terms of the compensation that they got back for Luka. They were fleeced completely in the deal based on the context of that moment. But beyond that, whether or not Luka being moved will end up being the right thing for Dallas or the wrong thing in terms of on the court, you could make the case that, you know, the business of the Mavericks was impacted in a severely negative way by trading Luka Doncic, a player that was a fan favorite, one of the all-time fan favorites for that organization, probably either right there or just behind Dirk Nowitzki, who had won a title in 2011 for the Mavericks. But the knock against Luka, and there have been many of them, but the biggest knock is he's just never in shape. And if you watch Luka, he is, you know, he's a little, you know, he's paunch. He's got some, you know, baby fat, to say the least. He has that bigger, kind of methodical, slow-looking build. He is a brilliant shooter, a brilliant scorer, a brilliant playmaker. He'll be one of the all-time scorers in the history of the game. But he's not in shape. And he also very much plays a style of basketball that is difficult to win with. It's difficult to win 4 out of 7 4 times, which is what you need to do to win the NBA title when you play as much ISO basketball as Luka prefers. Lastly, Luka's championship shape, which he's not in, costs him defensively. Would he be a better defensive player in shape? Yes. If he worked on agility and foot speed and things like that, if he was committed to his trade, because he's a horrible defender. And really a disinterested defender, which is part of it. He is focused on the next offensive possession when the last offensive possession ends. Now, many times when the last offensive possession ends, he's very focused on getting his point across to the referee. He's a serial complainer and whiner, which, by the way, you know, it's convenient for him to miss out on defensive possessions because he's arguing at the other end of the floor. Sometimes they're better off playing 4-on-5 defensively than they are 5-on-5. That's how bad he is defensively. He could be better, though. He's got a big body. If he were in shape, if he worked on foot speed, got to be able to move your feet defensively. Everybody knows that. He can't move his feet defensively. And he looks very much like a guy that doesn't care to move much defensively. You know, in the NBA, there's a lot of just seeking out the weakest defender and getting your best offensive player matched up against the other team's worst defensive player. And you do that by bringing that worst defensive player into a ball screen and forcing a switch. And then it's like, okay, Luka's guarding Anthony Edwards. We got a problem. But J.J. Redick, who, by the way, talked a lot about coaches during his, brief media career, taking accountability. There's a lot of sound out there about J.J. Redick as a media analyst for ESPN. Doc Rivers in particular, who I do not think has been a very good coach at all, even though he's a championship coach. I mean, he ripped Doc Rivers last year. Take accountability. He hasn't taken any accountability for this season. I think J.J. Redick's a decent coach. I do, and I think he'll continue to grow and be a really good coach. But, man, this first year for him in the postseason when all eyes are on the actual league for the first time, because very few eyes are on it during the regular season. J.J. Redick had a rough week, and then called out his player that they traded for being in less than championship shape. There's nobody that's been paying attention that understood him in any other way other than understanding that when he said we've got to get in championship shape and we've got players on this roster who are in phenomenal shape, and then there are others that could have been in better shape. Number one on the others list is Luka Doncic. Is he committed enough? It's some of the stuff that Dallas saw in him. We had Chris Miles from NBA TV on the show, Max. Was that yesterday or the day before? I think it was the day before.
It was the day before, yeah.
And he said that, in talking to a lot of people in Dallas and being around some of the Mavericks teams in recent years, that Luka wasn't particularly well liked in the organization either by people, off the roster, the people that work for the team. He actually suggested that Kyrie Irving was much more well liked than Luka Doncic. They may have had legitimate reasons to move on from him, thinking we're never going to win a title with this particular person. He's not dedicated enough to working at improving the areas in which he is not great. It's still questionable as to whether or not they should have moved him. But the Lakers are out. Not great for the league. I was thrilled to see it. Minnesota's much more fun to watch. And J.J. Redick's a little bit insufferable, as is Luka. And we talked to Ben last segment because Ben covered the league and covered the Wizards for years before he covered the football team. It will be interesting to see what happens with LeBron James this summer. He has an opt-out. Does he retire? Does he decide to go elsewhere? A lot's in play with LeBron in this offseason. I was thinking about something the other day when Milwaukee lost, and Giannis Antetokounmpo basically is thought to be moving on. He won a title with Milwaukee. He's given the Bucks everything that he can give them, and that he's ready to move on. Kevin Durant apparently ready to, get to his next spot where he will end his career. And we played for you, I think, last week, the sound of Carmelo Anthony suggesting that Kevin Durant should end his career in Washington. How about a Cooper Flag, Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, big three in Washington next year? I think they can afford it, and they have a lot of trading capital for sure to make something like that happen. I think the Wizards basically have about 39 draft choices between now and the year 2031 or something like that. I don't know. I don't think that's the direction they're headed to bring on Kevin Durant at the end of his career, but, maybe they have gotten themselves closer to a position where even with the young talent they have now, and then adding maybe a Cooper Flag, maybe, or a Dylan Harper, who will likely be the second pick in the draft, could they, entice a legitimate Eastern Conference contender via the trade route? I doubt it. All right, when we come back, there's somebody that is a longtime draft analyst, thought to be more of an expert, who absolutely loved Washington's draft. You'll hear that next. Phil Mendelson, the DC City Council chair, after that.
Right, last night, the Washington Nationals avoid the sweep. They beat the Phillies 4-2. Brad Lord gets his first win of the season, and Kyle Finnegan with the save. They will take on the Reds tonight. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 5:40 on 106.7 The Fan. The New York Rangers have hired former Pittsburgh Penguins bench boss Mike Sullivan. This is kind of a homecoming for Mike, as he was drafted by the Rangers in the 4th round of the 1987 NHL draft. The Knicks closed out the Pistons last night, 116-113. Jalen Brunson capped off a 40-point game with the game winner in the final seconds. The Clippers forced Game 7, 111-105 over the Denver Nuggets. James Harden played 47 of 48 minutes. He put up 28 points, 6 rebounds, and 8 assists. The only one game tonight between the Rockets and Warriors, Steph Curry is battling a thumb injury, but he is expected to play. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
DC City Council Chair Phil Mendelson is going to call in about 10 minutes. So we'll talk some stadium with him. So Todd McShay, longtime, ESPN, and now I forget who he's with now, draft expert, draft analyst. He was, the second to Mel Kiper to become a massive personality. He apparently loves Washington's draft, one player in particular. Here was his review of it.
Washington. I liked it. They didn't have much capital, but they found two potential long-term starters. Connerly, left tackle, potentially. Trey Amos, there was talk about going late first out of Ole Miss.
For a 5-pick draft, I love this.
And Jalen Lane at 128, I had him in my top 100, and I don't apologize for it. What you guys watch it. You watch with that quarterback and that play caller. You watch Jalen Lane and his 4.3 something speed. Jalen Lane has never had a quarterback who can accurately get him the football. So everything was a reverse, a bubble screen, like all sorts of gimmicky stuff. He can return. He's an A++++ character. Just loves the game. I think Jalen Lane's going to wind up being the big surprise from this class as a 4th round pick.
Kay Medrano from the UCLA linebacker ran a 4.46. He's undersized, but he can cover. He's really good in coverage. And the other guy that I love, I think he's one of the cooler players in this class, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. But if you look at his New Mexico tape, he is an absolute slasher with great burst and speed. You get him in the late 7th round, he's a guy who could turn into a player.
Sorry, I don't know who the other person was, Max. Who was the other person?
I'm not sure either. It didn't list in the description. Forgive me.
Yeah. So, an opinion on the draft, but much more of a worthy opinion than Phil from Bethesda. But not really, because the odds on hit rate will probably be the same. But I like hearing what he said about Jalen Lane, and often that is the case with receivers who come out of college. You've got to project on what's this guy actually going to be when there's a quarterback that can throw a forward pass. Like, does he get the separation? Does he have the speed that puts fear into the defenses? And that's what you saw with Jalen Lane. I mean, massive separation with the speed. But because they didn't have a quarterback that could consistently get him the ball, they got him the ball at the line of scrimmage a lot, with a lot of bubble screens, with a lot of jet sweeps as a runner. He's an excellent punt returner as well. He's had 2 punt returns for touchdowns. Terry, Noah Brown are back. Luka McCaffrey's back. They've added Debo, obviously, and that's more weapon than just wide receiver. They signed Michael Gallup. But Jalen Lane will have a shot. I would imagine, and I think it was Larry Izzo who got very excited about this pick. They were looking for, an answer at wide receiver, but in hopes that they would find somebody who could also pencil in as a punt returner, maybe even a kickoff returner, because Jamison Crowder did it pretty well for them. There weren't any big plays necessarily, but they'd love to create big, field flipping plays on special teams. All right. Phil Mendelson, the DC City Council Chair, will join me next. Monday was an exciting day. It was a day of giddiness for Washington football fans and many residents of the city as well. Phil Mendelson's been a part of the D.C. City Council since 1998, and he was elected to the chair in 2012, where he has been for the better part of the last 13 years. Chairman Mendelson, thanks so much for making time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So on Monday, which was, quite the press event, I'm curious as to, where you were on that day. We'll get to where you are 5 days later, but the excitement of that day, what was your reaction in the moment?
Well, I think it's great news that the Commanders have finally said what we've thought, which is that they want to be in D.C. But I also thought, interesting, the deal that the council has known nothing about, none of the details, including that we would have to vote in less than 2 months, I think. There are a lot of details that we don't know at this point and that we need to know.
So where are you 5 days later? Do you know more details? I mean, the term sheet, the agreement, is out there. It's public. How far along are you in understanding what the deal is that the mayor cut with the team?
Well, not much farther. Now, I will say that the Commanders have reached out, and the Commanders have been, I would say, above and beyond wanting to work with the council, with the legislative branch, as we try to understand, and they've promised that they will get us more details so that we can better understand.
So you really don't know that much about the deal 5 days later in terms of what was agreed to? I'm assuming you've read through that term sheet.
Yes, and the term sheet has some basic numbers, but not a lot in the way of details. So we know this, that the mayor said that the city will put upfront $500 million in cash. We'll have to borrow for that. And we know that the city is to put another $181 million, not from the city's general fund budget, but from Events DC, which is our convention authority, which is taxpayer money. And then we know also that there's a commitment to put up another $175 million in, I think it's like 2032, the year 2032. Those three numbers total $856 million. But then we also know that there are going to be borrowing costs, which will add to that. And we don't know what exactly is planned or what the costs are with regard to metro rail, the station. Will there need to be a new station, which could cost a couple $100 million, or are we simply expanding the existing station, which I think might be adequate? But that we don't know the cost for that. All those numbers add up to over $1 billion. Right. And what I don't know, because the term sheet's not clear on, is what revenues the city is getting. It appears we will not get rent, and it appears that we will not get property tax, and it's not clear to me, but I think the sales tax will not be coming to the city, but will be redirected to pay for maintenance. I'm not positive of that, and parking, I believe we will not be getting parking tax. So the revenue picture is completely unclear, and we need to see that as well. I know that in the past, with, for example, the Nationals ballpark and with Audi Field, that there was the initial deals negotiated by the mayor were more generous than the final deals that the council approved in terms of tax abatements and what the city's share of expenses would be.
Yeah. All right. So you just mentioned a bunch of areas, and I was going to ask you,
Yes.
The parts of the deal, this is never final, right? Would you characterize Monday as like the beginning of a negotiation?
Yes, although I think the mayor tried to picture it or paint it as the end of the negotiation and put the best gloss on it, which is fine. That's the way these always roll out.
Right. I mean, putting the emotion to the side, you'll get to the substance. And it sounds to me like you've already hit on some of these areas: rent, property tax, sales tax, parking. And I was going to ask you, like, I think most people understand this is, this wasn't the end, even though it was kind of presented as if it was the end. We've already gone through that with the basketball team and the hockey team, and the announcement with Governor Youngkin in Virginia, which seemed very final in the moment. But what are the areas, even without knowing specifically where that revenue is, you seem to have a good handle on the cost side. Where are the areas of, for the lack of a better description, the areas in which you guys will haggle?
Well, I think it's all the above. And, I left out of the picture in terms of the details. The city has divided the total site, which is scores of acres, has divided it into 6, what they call districts. I would call them parcels.
Yeah.
And there's the stadium district or stadium parcel. Obviously, that will be the stadium. But the commanders will be given development control over 2 other parcels. And we know very little of the details there. As far as I can tell, they will get all of the upside from development of those parcels, which includes office, residential, hotel, and retail. And as I said, we don't know any of the details there. I had thought for some time that one way to finance the stadium that would help the commanders would be to give them development rights and therefore profit from the development, which would help pay for the stadium. It looks like that's part of this, but I've seen no numbers on it at all. So I would say all of this is subject to negotiation.
Take us through the process with something like this. I mean, you went through it with, as you mentioned, Audi Field and Nats Park. I don't think a lot of us really understand when something like this happens and there is, a term sheet agreed to, mayor and the team, big press event. Do you take a straw vote with the other 12 members, which is what you have right now, I believe, another 12 members, just to find out and gauge where everybody is right from the jump? And then between now and whenever you actually vote on this, what is the process? Do you lead the process? How does it work?
Well, no, there isn't a straw vote, but I wouldn't be chairman or have been chairman for as many years if I didn't have a sense of where members are. And I would say that, and I've been asked this by the press, it's actually not a useful question, but if there was a vote today, I don't think the votes are there. But I think most of the members would like to see a better deal. I would like to see a better deal. And that is one of the challenges we have with some members of the public who are, there are always going to be some folks who say, oh God, this is really great. We're so excited to see the commanders come back. Just say yes. But we need to negotiate a better deal, and I'm confident there can be a better deal for the city that works for the commanders and doesn't cost the taxpayer as much.
So take me through that process, because that's the first step here,
Sure.
right? You have a sense of where the vote would be today, and you said that you don't have the votes. That's fine. But what is the process? Is it you? Who's in charge? Who takes the lead on getting this deal understood and looking at the areas in which you need the deal to change?
Well, I'm, of course, going to work with colleagues, but we will start to do some analysis. We've already asked, as I said earlier, the commanders for additional information. So we will undergo analysis of all the data we can get, as well as identify questions that haven't been answered that for which we need answers, and just start to do the analysis on what is the cost and what is the return. And we'll also do some comparisons with other cities. I have been told to not look at Los Angeles, but I think Los Angeles got a more expensive stadium with zero public dollars.
Yeah. Stan Kroenke funded the whole thing.
Yeah, and as I'm talking to you, I don't know the details on other cities like Nashville or Philadelphia. I understand Cleveland is in the process of going through a new stadium. So we will look at what's going on with other stadiums. I mentioned before the development potential for those two parcels next to the stadium for which the Commanders would be getting development rights. And so we're going to go through a period of analysis. There also will, of course, be a public hearing. As we are talking right now, I don't know when that hearing will be. Our situation is complicated by the fact that the mayor has not sent us a budget yet. She's going to be 2 months overdue for next fiscal year. And we're supposed to get that in 2 weeks. That is going to be all consuming. So I don't know how we're going to be able to do both of these at the same time. But we will do what we can. That's going to affect, I think the reason why I mentioned it is because that will affect when we would have a hearing. I would like us to have done a substantial amount of analysis before we have a public hearing. And of course, we have to fit the public hearing into the schedule with all the budget that's going on. I should add that this price tag that we know of $1 billion is especially challenging because we know that we're going to receive a proposed budget for next year that has hundreds of millions of dollars in reduced spending. What's being cut? And then on top of that, what is being cut to make room for the stadium project? You know, the mayor talks about the stadium being great for economic development, and it is. But this is economic development that really wouldn't take place until about 2030. If I remember correctly, the Commanders want to open the stadium in the fall of 2030. And we need economic development right now. Not saying that's a reason to be, that's not a negative on this proposal. But in terms of the need for economic development, this is a long-term strategy, and we need short-term strategies as well.
We're talking to Chairman of the City Council, Phil Mendelson, right now. This is more of a minutia question, but I didn't get an answer from you, and I'm just curious. In terms of understanding the deal and coming up with, a response to the deal, we don't like this part of the deal. We don't like this part of the deal. We're okay with this deal. Do you guys use like a broker, like you would if you bought a building or you leased a building? Or is it the City Council members as a group that you guys have the expertise to sort of negotiate this deal?
Well, as you know, there are 12 members of the council, and each of us has been intimately involved in building a stadium in another city. Not. For Audi Field, we did bring on a consultant who did a lot of the analysis. We have more capacity with our central staff to do some of that analysis now, but I am looking to bring a consultant on who will do some of that analysis. So no, I was not serious when I said that all 12 of us have been intimately involved with stadiums in other cities. We don't have all that. We don't have that expertise.
Yep. So you mentioned a public hearing. That's obviously different than a public vote, but just explain that to me.
Well, we actually, as a matter of policy, the council has a public hearing on all bills that we're considering. And we'll do that here. We had a public hearing at least one day for Audi Field. I think there were many days for the National Stadium. There was a hearing that we had last year for Monumental Sports when the deal was reached for them to stay in the city. We want to give the public an opportunity to weigh in. I expect there'll be a lot of fans who say, just take it the way it is. I expect that there'll be a lot of residents who come in and say, no stadium at all. But it's important that we give everybody the opportunity to testify. And it also will be an opportunity, I think, for the council to say a bit more after we've done some analysis of what this deal looks like in terms of cost and benefit.
Yeah, I mean, are those public hearings are they influential in terms of the response to the vote?
They can be. I certainly don't want to be dismissive of it at this point. I mean, there's a value in that the citizens who care have an opportunity to speak, but this early in the process, I don't know what suggestions could come that would be useful. And as I said, I'm hopeful that we will have done enough analysis that perhaps we can help educate the public of the cost and benefit.
All right, we're talking to Phil Mendelson, the city council chair. Real quickly, back to Monday. Your reaction, I'm not suggesting that your reaction indicates this, but emotionally, was it off-putting to you?
Oh gosh. No, I think I was of two emotions that day. One was the mayor had not collaborated with us, but I think the more important reaction was that the prospect of the football team relocating to the city is exciting. And I've been to this before, so I'm just used to the fact that a mayor will roll out a proposal and everybody gets excited and we start to look at it and make improvements to what's been negotiated. In this case, I hope the improvements will be substantial.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that she's 2 months overdue on the, fiscal year 26 budget. That this deal and the announcement of it was a surprise, and there wasn't, sort of an indication of anything given to the city council before. Look, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I'll just speak for myself, and I could be way off. It surprises me that it's like a brand new thing, that you haven't had at least thoughts of what the deal would look like, of what the budget that she's going to submit that's overdue looks like, because you've kind of indicated that you kind of have to start from scratch once you get it. So there's no kind of an understanding of what may or may not be in those things, or what may or may not have been in a stadium agreement before, the Monday presser?
Well, as you know, the story leaked a bit 2 weeks
about
ago.
A week and a half ago.
Yeah, and that was the first we saw any details. What I knew before Monday was what everybody else knew from that leak. I can't say that it's a very good way to run a government, but I have met with the commanders and I have said to them quite, how do I want to say it, quite firmly that at this point, I view my conversations as with them, and I'm not holding them at fault for whatever the mayor did or did not share. And I'm not sure I'm saying that quite the way I want to, but the relationship at this point is between the council and the commanders. And they have been very cooperative, and I'm optimistic that we will make this a better deal.
So let's just go with chronologically. What are the next steps? Is it in your court now to go back to the team and say, this is what we, would like to discuss with respect to, costs and potential revenue?
Well, actually, this may come as a little bit of a shock, but it's still in the mayor's court because she hasn't submitted anything to the council. So the next step is she has to submit the proposal, right, which will be legislative language and documents backing it up. She has to submit that to the council.
But you've already had one meeting, you said, with the team. You've already had conversations with the team.
Yeah.
So,
so I'm not waiting for the mayor to submit the legislation, but that is the next step. And the team has promised that they will give us additional information, numbers that they have. And so that would be the next step. And then we go back and forth and plus do our own analysis.
All right. So you said you don't have the votes today. Right now, just your hunch. How tough of a pitch will it be to get the votes?
Too soon to say.
When do you see the vote taking place?
Well, it's interesting because I was just reading some news articles this morning that pointed out that the Nationals was a couple of years and Audi Field was, I think, 6 months. The Monumental is not quite a good comparison, but members got behind the $500 million offer in December, and I think our vote was in June. So that's roughly 6 months. I really haven't plotted out the schedule because we've got this budget to work on as well, but it's going to be many months.
So the July 15th deadline that we've read about is not doable from your standpoint.
My public position on that is that it will be very difficult.
And would that be problematic for the team?
I think I read somewhere that the team or the mayor said we can extend that.
Okay. I mean, you've had a conversation with the team. I don't care where it's been read. Did you discuss that with the team about the importance of a July 15th deadline?
I'll say I discussed it, but I'm not going to go into the details of what we discussed.
But you don't think it can be voted on before July 15th or by July 15th?
Correct.
Okay. What is your, taking your city council chair's hat off for a moment and, being a longtime DC resident, what's your emotional part of this? Do you want to see the football team return to DC or not?
I think it would be great. I probably shouldn't say this on the air, but I'm more of a hockey fan and a baseball fan, but you can appreciate sports without being involved in every one. You asked my personal, where I am personally.
Sure. No, I appreciate the honesty. The other thing is just the idea of, if not the football team, would there be a compelling plan for that parcel of land that would, generate an ROI that would be demonstrably better?
Oh, I think so. I definitely think so. It might not happen quite as quickly because, as I said, there are 6 parcels and 3 of them would be with the Commanders, one of which is the stadium. And the Commanders would see that, I'm pretty sure without having seen the numbers, that the development of those other 2 parcels is profitable to them. So there's a little more juice to do it more quickly, those 2 parcels, which gets that whole site under development. But, and this isn't a knock against the stadium, that entire site is developable, and it's developable with housing and office. It's a large site. It's a little bit like, imagine the wharf. And, the wharf was 2 or 3 old, bad restaurants and a lot of parking lots. And that's not what it is at all today. And that could just as easily happen at the RFK site.
How do you, though, quantify just and maybe you can't, the psychological impact of having a downtown beautiful sports stadium that gets massive exposure, many nights a year? I'm not talking about the majority of nights a year, because we know that football plays much less than basketball and hockey and baseball do. But is there a part of that sort of offsets maybe a better literal ROI?
Well, in terms of other events, that's one of the data. Is that the right way to say it? That we want to look at. There's been talk
what a
about
Super Bowl would bring the city.
Yes, we need to look at all that. But a Super Bowl, if it was in the city, would be once a generation. Surely exciting, but just that's 1 year out of 20. And that's true for some of the other events. It's just part of the analysis that we need to do. The idea behind the Dome Stadium is that there would be more events there. How many more? Is it really going to be 200? I think to be fair, the 200 is all kinds of events in terms of patrons or fans over 40,000. The number's less, but is that realistic? That stuff we'll be looking at. Part of your question was the psychological value. There is a lot of excitement right now with the idea of the team being back in the city. I think that will fade a bit because we've always thought of the Commanders as the Washington Commanders and the Washington football team.
I agree with that. Yeah.
But there's not to knock the psychological benefit.
Yeah. No, what you just said, I think, is a bit hyperbolic with those that say in Maryland all those years it wasn't Washington's team. It's always been Washington's team. All right. What else? What haven't I asked you that's important?
Well, I'm not sure I've said enough about the context that we're getting this proposal, and that is roughly at the same time that we'll be getting the budget for next year. And we expect that next year's budget is going to have hundreds of millions of dollars in spending reductions. That's just because of the revenue picture for the city right now, the federal job layoffs, the grant cutbacks. And so we're going to be seeing cuts. And then what else is going to be cut to make room for this stadium proposal? That's also an important component of the analysis that we need to do. The bottom line is that the council has a duty to scrutinize this proposal. There's a lot of details in terms of revenue and cost that we do not yet know. And I'm optimistic that we can come up with a better deal for the city.
And you've been complimentary of the team. Do you think this could have ever happened with the old owner?
No, you really want me to go there?
Yeah. Sure.
No, I don't think it would have happened with the old team.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. Best of luck. I hope you get all the details that you're looking for soon and get what you need as you scrutinize the deal and this thing moves forward. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. And as we get it, the public will get it.
Chairman Phil Mendelson from the City Council, everybody. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. From Chris, so basically all the pageantry of the press conference with Riggo, Gibbs, Green, and Goodell was just ginning up the fan base in national media. Yeah, I think that, and we even talked about this Monday afterwards, is that you do it that way. And Joe Maloney, who was on with us yesterday, said that the press conference on Monday was very intentional. The intention being get everybody ginned up, get everybody excited so that, city council members who are on the fence or leaning no, find it to be a political disadvantage not to vote for it. However, it's also the beginning of a negotiation. It's the way these things work. A term sheet is not an actual agreement. It is, here are the terms that we have discussed, and it's the framework for an actual deal between the city and the team. And it is the job of the city council to protect the best interests of the city and to go back and, negotiate the parts of the deal that they don't think are fair to the city. This came from my guy Seth in Potomac. He writes, how doesn't he have all of the details of this deal? And why can't they just work around the clock to understand it, negotiate it, and vote on it? 6 months? Come on. That's bureaucratic speed. It drives me nuts. Seth, I feel the same way, man. Feel the same way. But those that kind of come from different backgrounds, especially if you've ever been in more of an early stage entrepreneurial environment versus, the 9 to 5 environment. Yeah. And I think I asked him, I said, I'm a bit surprised that at this point you don't have more of not only the details of this deal, but the details of the budget that the mayor apparently is 2 months late on. They have to have some sense of it. He's posturing too, because he wants as much time and he wants everybody to understand, hey, this got sprung on us. We didn't know anything about this. Of course they knew something about this. This has been once they got control of the federal land, this was all that we've been thinking would happen. That's why one of the things I said about Monday is kind of surprised me that people kind of treated it like it was this massive, shocking, breaking news event. No, it wasn't. We knew that eventually we were going to get to that. In fact, we were wondering why it was taking so long. The reason it was taking so long was the $410 million congressional pushback on the 25 budget. And that's what slowed the process down. But yeah, Seth, I hear you on that. And look, the team does have, a deadline, and I guess there are ways around deadlines. They can always extend them. It's a term sheet. It's not a final agreement. But, from the team standpoint, they need to know at some point this is going to happen, or all of a sudden 2030, which is when they want to be in a new stadium, becomes an issue. So, yeah. By the way, in the chairman's defense, this isn't all they work on. They've got, they've got all of the details, as he described, of the 26 budget, which will include, what did he say? Tens, whatever it was, hundreds of or tens of millions of dollars in cuts. I may have that wrong. Hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts. That they're going to have to deal with before they get into the new expenditure, which is a minimum of $500 million, but will eventually be $1.1 billion plus for the city as it's currently laid out in the current term sheet agreement. It's all there, by the way. That, if you're into reading the details of what the mayor and the team have come to an agreement on in terms of the term sheet, the business details, he's, I'm sure, read through every detail of it. But, they all want to be given the opportunity and the time and to get it right. And what do I believe at this point? If you care, I believe that there will be at least 7 votes that are yes votes, and that by 2030, the team will be in its new digs. And by the way, long term, this will look like a great thing for the city. It will work out for the city. But from their standpoint, you don't take the initial deal that you weren't involved in negotiating and you have the responsibility to approve and just accept it. He mentioned consultants or brokers, whatever. they have, I would assume, people who are very familiar with stadium deals and with the city's situation, and try to create the best response to this initial term sheet. Anyway, it's an interesting thing. There's a lot we don't understand. And yes, for those of you who have been in the private sector and have, been involved in negotiating big deals, sometimes they do work a little bit differently than they do when you have 12 council members that all have the best interests of their wards, at stake. But yes, Seth, I'm with you. Sometimes the speed in which government works is a little bit frustrating for, I'm sure, someone, for people that have been in sort of faster moving environments. But I appreciate him coming on and being honest and talking about, what they need. They need to, they've already discussed a lot of this stuff with the team, it appears, and they're waiting for the mayor to submit that 26, FY fiscal year 26 budget so they can see everything that's in it. All right. There is some breaking sports news. It's not anything dealing with our team, but I do want to talk about it and tell you what it is, and we'll do that when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
All right, last night, the Nats avoid the sweep. They beat the Phillies 4-2. Brad Lord gets his first win of the season, and Kyle Finnegan comes away with the save. They will take on the Reds tonight. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 5:40 on 106.7 The Fan. The New York Rangers have hired former Penguins bench boss Mike Sullivan. This is a homecoming for Mike as he was drafted by the Rangers in round 4 of the 1987 NHL draft. Greg Popovich will no longer be the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs. He is transitioning full-time to team president, sources told ESPN. The NBA all-time winningest coach and led the Spurs to 5 championships. Former Panthers and Ravens receiver Steve Smith Sr. has been sued in North Carolina under a homewrecker law. Smith is accused of having an extended affair with a member of the Baltimore Ravens marching band. The lawsuit claims for alienation of affection, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent infliction of emotional distress. The complaint seeks compensatory damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The plaintiff is seeking at least $100,000 for Steve Smith's alleged interference in his marriage. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1, and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
So there's news out of the NBA. Greg Popovich is stepping down officially as the team's basketball coach. He's going to transition into a full-time role as the team's president of basketball operations. If you don't know, he had a stroke early in the season. It was in November, and he hasn't coached since. He's 76 years old. He's been a part of the Spurs since 94, and he's been the team's head coach since 1996, 1997. He's the all-time NBA career wins leader as a coach with 1,422 regular season wins, and he guided San Antonio to 5 NBA titles. Put aside whatever you think about Greg Popovich, an all-time legendary coach. And you know what's interesting is the dynasty conversation. You know, San Antonio had a dynasty, man, under Popovich. And I think it's like one of the more underrated dynasties from this standpoint. Over a 22-year run, they won 5 titles. They lost in the championship series once. They made the Western Conference Finals 5 times, and they never missed the postseason. They were in the playoffs every year, beginning in the 97-98 season, and over the next 22 seasons, they ended up winning 5 titles. They ended up losing in the championship series once. They went to 5 Western Conference Finals, and they never missed the postseason. That's a hell of a run, man. You know, look, the all-time dynasties are, you know, the Celtics of the 50s and 60s, the 11 titles in 12 years or whatever it was. The Yankees of the, 40s through the 60s, the 10 titles that they had. The Yankees have had a couple, I guess. The Patriots, certainly, of the Brady era, 6 titles from 2001 to 2018. The Jordan Bulls from 91 to 98. The Packers of the 60s, for sure. The Lombardi Packers. We know all the NFL, dynasties. The Packers of the 60s, the Steelers of the 70s, the Niners of the 80s. The 90s, if you want to say Dallas, I guess we could say Dallas. Wasn't a true long run dynasty. And then we had the Patriots, who basically had 2 decades of a dynasty. There have been others. The Chiefs here recently are in the midst of a dynastic run. The Lakers have had multiple runs. The Magic, Kareem, Worthy, Byron Scott, Cooper, 80s Lakers teams that won 5 titles. That's, a dynasty. But man, the Spurs, and I'm sure there's some hockey ones, the Canadians, the Oilers, I guess the Islanders of the 70s and 80s, and their titles. I think the Islanders won like 4 titles in like 5 years or something like that. But the San Antonio Spurs, the 22 years under Popovich before, Duncan retired and Tony Parker was gone. What a run, man. Never missing the postseason in 22 years, winning 5 titles, losing once in the finals, being in the Western Conference Finals 11 times. 11 times. Every 50% of that run, they were at least in the conference finals. I went back and looked this up during the break. During the Spurs' time in the NBA, prior to the seasons that they have had as they've, torn it down and started to rebuild it, which it's rebuilding nicely with Victor Wembanyama, and they'll end up with a new coach. I don't know if it'll be the interim coach or not. But when they entered the NBA in the 76 season, over a 48-year period in the NBA, the San Antonio Spurs have only missed the postseason. Until recently, they had only missed over a 48-year period the postseason 3 times. I mean, it's one of the more underrated, great franchises of all time. Maybe it's just me who's underrating it. Maybe others out there are going, no, I've always known San Antonio to be a great franchise. I mean, when they first moved into the NBA, They were in the Eastern Conference. Doug Moe was their coach. The Iceman, George Gervin, was their best player. But they had other good players, too. They added Artis Gilmore. They had James Silas. They had a guy like Mike Mitchell. They had some really good players. And as Eastern Conference members, they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. And they lost to the Washington Bullets in 7 games in 1979. And then they went to the Western Conference, and they made it to the conference finals multiple times, but could not get through the Lakers. They lost 3 times to the Lakers in the conference finals. But those were years in which San Antonio was good too. You'd be hard-pressed to find a franchise in any of the 4 major professional sports that have missed the playoffs as few times as San Antonio has. I think that's true. Now, basketball and hockey have a bigger opportunity to make the postseason. But, they weren't just, first-round losers year in and year out. They were championship contenders in a lot of those years. The David Robinson into the Tim Duncan, into the Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker and Kawhi Leonard, who, was a finals MVP in 2014. Man, I wonder if Kawhi had stayed in San Antonio, how many more titles they would have won before Duncan retired. Anyway, Popovich stepping down after all of these years. I think most people saw this coming because I don't know that he's been fully recovered from the stroke. I'm not speaking out of turn. I've read things periodically here and there, and now that he's stepping down full-time as a coach, he is transitioning into a team president role. So we'll see. All right. Yeah. By the way, the Falcons, I don't know if you saw this. The Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator, was hired. It was his son that pulled the prank from Ole Miss on Shadur Sanders. They got a hold of the private phone number. I did read, by the way, real quickly, one of the reasons all of these teams were given Shadur Sanders' private number is because he didn't have an agent. Usually the only numbers the teams have access to are the agent's numbers. Now, still, you can't send out, which apparently the league did, a group email to all of the team executives with Shadur's private phone number on it. The kid got a copy of the email of his dad's email, and then they pranked him. But the Falcons are getting fined $250,000, and Ulbrich himself will be fined $100,000. Thanks, son. Kids are costly. All right, we're done for the day. Have a great weekend. Chris Russell's next.